name Morgan, and today I'm excited to take a first look at Paul Bunyan by Stevens. And this was a gift from my paternal grandparents, and they have a love for books. Like, they collect a great deal of books, and I believe that this was one that they got from like a library sale, like where a library was selling old books that they were getting rid of. And I can kind of tell that based on the back, if you open the back cover, there is a list of like date loaned, and then there's like a little envelope here that has the name of a library on it. So that's really cool. And I really love how there are all these numerous dates here, because it shows that this book was very well loved. It was checked out a great deal of times. And now I'm going to go ahead and open it up from the front. Oh, and in the margin here, there is some, I can't really read it very well, but there's some pencil writing. So someone wrote in the front cover with pencil, which is fascinating. And then I turn the page here, and it's just some, a blank page here. And then I'm going to turn the page again, and it says Paul Bunyan. Let me turn the page. Okay, and here's another like set of blank pages. Oh, this is a beautiful like print here. It's like a drawing illustration. James Stevens, Paul Bunyan, and then there's this little pencil writing that says 651 on it. Woodcuts by Alan Lewis. So this is a woodcut, and it looks to be a man carrying what looks like a pig, and I think he's wading through a river. I'm not 100% certain. And then it says the Star GC, and then what I think says PCO series. Like it's it seems to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like one of those symbols that like a corporation or whatever would use. And then it says Garden City, New York, Garden City Publishing Co. Inc. And this page has a lot of like markings on it, like brown spots. I wonder if this was a page that was like opened up a lot or turned to a lot. And then I'm going to try and turn the page again. Copyright 1925 by Alfred A. Knopf. It's Knopf Inc. And I love the very clear copyright date, because I believe that it's, well, that says more than 96 years old, so it should be in the public domain in the United States, to the best of my knowledge, though keep in mind I am not a lawyer. Okay, note, 4 of Mr. Lewis's woodcuts were originally made for and are used by courtesy of the Century magazine. And then it has these numbers 5155 that I don't think these were original to the book. It looks like it was like written on by like a felt tip pen at a later date. Manufactured in the United States of America, to Othman Stevens. Then I'm going to turn the page again. Oh, and then there's a table of contents, and this page also looks like it's been turned to a lot, because there's this weird mystery piece of something stuck there, and then there is like a pencil marking. Contents. Introduction, page 1. The Winter of the Blue Snow, page 11. The Bull of the Woods, page 31. A Matter of History, page 51. The Sourdough Drive, page 70. The Black Duck Dinner, page 90. The Old Home Camp, page 114. Shanty Boy, page 132. The Kingdom of Kansas, page 149. Oratorical Medicine, page 169. New Iowa, page 188. The He-Man Country, page 207. And Evil Inventions, page 225. Okay, and then I'm going to turn the page again, and we get to the introduction. Introduction. The Paul Bunyan legend had its origin in the Papinial Rebellion of 1837. This was a revolt of the French Canadians against their young English queen. In the Two Mountains country at St. Eustache, many loggers armed with mattocks, axes, and wooden forks, which had been steamed and warped into hooks, stormed into battle. Among them was a mighty-muscled, bellicose, bearded giant named Paul Bunyan. This forest warrior, with a mattock in one hand and a great fork in the other, powerful as Hercules, and indomitable as Spartacus, bellowing like a furious Titan raged among the Queen's troops like Samson among the Philistines. He came out of the rebellion with great fame among his own kind. His slaughters got the grandeur of legend. Later, this Paul Bunyan operated a logging camp, and that day logging was heroic labor. In the autumn, the loggers went to the woods, forcing their way in bateaux up swift rivers. On every trip there were many wearisome portages around rapids. Snow and ice then locked them in their camps for 5 or 6 months. The workday was from dawn to dusk. The loggers lived on beans, salt pork, and sourdough bread. At night there were songs and hymns around the shanty stove. Of course, these were mainly about their own life, their own heroes. The camp boss was like the chief of a tribe. His will had to be the law, and he had to have exceptional physical power and courage to enforce it. After his part in the rebellion, there was no more famous camp chief in Canada than Paul Bunyan. Sure that the Paul Bunyan stories, which have been told for generations in the American timberlands, were of Canadian origin, I questioned many old-time French-Canadian loggers before I found genuine proofs. At last, I met Louis Latourneau in the Big Berry country, Puyallup, Washington, and Louis's father-in-law, Z. Burnett, a snow-maned, shining-eyed, keen-minded veteran logger of 90 years, told me about the original hero. His uncle, Colette Belaine, fought by the side of Paul Bunyan and later worked 2 seasons for him. Now, the French Canadians have no genius for the humor of purposeful exaggeration such as the Americans have. The habitants exaggerate honestly and enthusiastically and with an illusion of truth, like Tartarin of Tarascon. My uncle, Colette Belaine, said Mr. Burnett earnestly, know that Paul Bunyan carried 500 pounds on portage. That is truth. He was very big, strong man, you understand. He fight like hell. He work like hell. And pack like hell. Never was another man like Paul Bunyan. That's right. It is not difficult to imagine the habitants honestly exaggerating the logging feats of the war hero as they talked about him in the New Brunswick camps, and in Maine, and in the Great Lakes pineries. And it is simple for one who has seen the 2 races together to imagine the Americans improving on the first stories about Paul Bunyan, only to ridicule his extravagant admirers, and then developing their own Paul Bunyan legend to ease their weariness when their 12-hour day was done. Other evidence supports this view of the origin of the stories. There are stories told about an Irish-French-Canadian logger, Joe Maffra. Murphy was his ancestral name, and the name of Joe Maffra is famous in the woods, sometimes being linked with Paul Bunyan's. He appears in the Red River Lumber Company's collection of Paul Bunyan stories. Now, Joe Maffra logged in the Mistassini River country in Quebec less than 50 years ago. I've seen pictures of this huge frowning man and his oxen. Many old French Canadians have sworn to me that he put the calks in his boots in the shape of his initials, and that after the 13th drink he would kick his initials in a ceiling 8 feet high. His feats in camp and on the log drives were as magnificent. It was the American loggers below the border who made of Paul Bunyan a true hero of camp nights as entertainment. They gave him Babe, the blue ox, who measured 42 axe handles and a plug of chewing tobacco between the horns. They created the marvelous mythical logging camp with its cookhouse of mountainous size and history of Olympian feats, and they peopled this camp with astounding minor heroes. They made their Paul Bunyan an inventor, an orator, and an industrialist whose labors surpassed those of Hercules. They devised a chronology for him. He ruled American life in the period between the winter of the blue snow and the spring that the rain came up from China. By 1860, Paul Bunyan had become a genuine American legendary hero. Perhaps the Paul Bunyan narrator who won most lasting fame was Lenday, whose firm of Lenday & Son was one of the largest lumber concerns of Minneapolis in the 60s. I had often heard of him, and lately Mr. Michael Christopher Quinn, yard superintendent for the Northwestern Lumber Company of Hoquiam, Washington, for 22 years, gave me a first-hand account of him. In 1873, Mr. Quinn was working in a great log drive down the Mississippi. His camp was at Haney Landing, Minnesota. Lunday was then 85, a prosperous and influential lumberman, but the lure of the drive and of camp life still stirred the true logger soul of him, and he came to the camp each spring. Every night the gang gathered in the cookhouse to hear the old camp bard declaim a canto of the Paul Bunyan epic. Lunday told the stories in sections, said Mr. Quinn. A section, or a canto, or chapter, or whatever one may call it, was delivered each night by the old lumberman, who could see toiling demigods and sweating heroes in his dark woods, and imagine narratives about them, to which he gave the substance and characters of the traditional Paul Bunyan stories. Lunday had lived in New Brunswick in the 40s and had thus heard the stories in their beginnings. The Paul Bunyan stories, which form the body of the legend, have not had many changes or surviving additions in 50 years. They themselves are not a narrative. They exist, rather, as a group of anecdotes, which are told among a group of campmen until the storyteller of the gang is started on a narrative which he makes up as he yarns along, and which may take him an hour or 3 evenings to relate. A Paul Bunyan bunkhouse service is a glory to hear when it is spontaneous and in a proper setting, preferably around a big heater in the winter, when the wind is howling through crackling boughs outside, and the pungent smell of steaming wool drifts down from the drying lines above the stove. When the vasty spirit of the woods really moves the meeting, a noble and expansive ecstasy of the soul is exhibited. Remarks are passed about a similar night in Paul Bunyan's camp, when the wind blew so hard that Big Ol, the blacksmith, had to bolt iron straps over the logs to keep them from being sucked up the chimneys. The theme grows and bears strange fruits, and finally the camp bard harvests them all in a story based on such a venerable anecdote as that one about Big Ol toting one of Babe's ox shoes for half a mile and sinking knee-deep into the solid rock at every step. This anecdote is what might be called a key story, for it is one of the very old ones. There are at least 100 of these, all familiar to every man who has worked long in the woods. They all deal with some of the characters whom tradition has placed about Paul Bunyan, with the mighty logger himself as the main hero. Their settings are in such regions as the Onion River country, the Bullfrog Lake country, or the Leaning Pine country, and each one is a theme for gorgeous yarns, when a knowing and gifted camp bard is inspired to use it. Nowadays, with a shed garage in every logging camp, a radio in the camp office, graphophones in the bunkhouses, and a jazz shack in the village just over the hump, the camp bard has a scant audience. But in happier times, each camp enjoyed its chief storyteller, and such a bard could take one of the key stories and elaborate on it for hours, building a complete narrative, picturing awe-inspiring characters, inventing dialogue of astonishing eloquence, and what stupendous curses, terrifying threats, and verbose oration such bards as Happy Olsen and Old-Time Sandy could invent. It is the method of the old bards that I have attempted to follow in writing this book. The art of the plain American, which in the last century brought forth tales and songs as native to the soil as the grass of the prairies, is at last perishing under the feet of the herd arts of a perfected democratic culture. The legends about Buffalo Bill and Brigham Young have passed. These heroes are now plain figures in book history. Jim Bridger, the heroic old man of the mountains, is obscenely and falsely portrayed in a movie to draw snickers from the chiropractors, pants salesmen, and tin roofers who are the passionate devotees of this carnal herd art. Kentucky and Tennessee mountain folk still tell their tales about Old Daniel, tales in which the listener will discover a boon 1,000 times more picturesque and grand than the hero of written history. Crockett, Carson, old Andy Jackson, Sam Houston, but I could name a score whom the plain man's untutored art ennobled and glorified in a manner that put the erudite narrators to shame. This art is perishing simply because universal education and other blights, curses, and evil inventions of democracy are destroying all the old simplicity, imaginativeness, and self-amusement of plain American life. Only in a few regions, and among the elders, do the creations of this art, this folklore, or whatever one wills to call it, survive as shining memorials to sturdier and survive as shining memorials to sturdier and nobler days. And the legend of Paul Bunyan is certainly the greatest of these creations, for it embodies the souls of the millions of American campmen who have always done the hard and perilous pioneer labor of this country. It is true American legend now, for Paul Bunyan, as he stands today, is absolutely American from head to foot. He visualizes perfectly the American love of tall talk and tall doings, the true American exuberance and extravagance. Beginning in Paul Bunyan, soldier with Papineau, he has become the creation of whole generations of men. Thousands of narrators by far-flung campfires have contributed their mites to the classical picture of him. And he, at least, will live as long as there is a forest for his refuge, as long as there are shadows and whispers of trees. I want to thank the old camp comrades who have sent me so many versions of all the known Keys stories, and who have given me accounts of new ideas. They, and several lumbermen also, have been very kind to me, and I owe gratitude particularly to Mr. H.L. Mencken of the American Mercury. Without his help and encouragement, the stories would not have been written. And here is another woodcut illustration, and it is of a big, buff, strong person holding up what looks kind of like a ship to me, but I'm not 100% certain. And it looks kind of like waves in the background. And then on the next page it says Paul Bunyan. And that would start the actual story. I'm going to take a quick look through here, see if there's anything else that isn't part of the actual text. And I guess this is the end of the first look, and I hope that you return soon to hear the actual readings of the stories. I hope that you have a great day. Bye!